Welcome to the DevReady podcast. On today's episode of the DevReady podcast, I have Igor Portugal joining me. Thanks for joining me, Igor.
Thanks, Anthony. Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you on. I'll let you take over your introductions because there's no way I'll do it justice.
Sure. I've been a serial tech entrepreneur in New Zealand for the last nearly 30 years. I've started my first IT business in 1998. And then I had a couple of successful exits. Successful by New Zealand standards. I wouldn't call myself successful by Silicon Valley standards anywhere near, but good enough. I'm pretty happy. And after a short stint at a corporate career, I'm back at building startups, and the experience and the grey hairs help a lot.
I'm sure they do. The grey hairs have come from the experience, not the other way around.
Hell yes, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So, before we dive into your sort of startup entrepreneurial journey, where did you branch out to when you went into that corporate period?
So,
what did you move to?
So it's interesting. My background is I am a software developer. I've been trained software developer by background, and before I started on my entrepreneurial journey, I used to be a software developer. Started out as an employee. Then I was fortunate enough to fall into a contracting space. So I kind of learned what it is to run your own kind of show. When you're a contractor, you're almost a one-man band business. And I ended up helping some of my friends with their business startups and doing some of their development for them on a contract. And then as I started in my own business and my own startup land, and I've been running startups for about 50, nearly 20 years. I started running business about nearly 20 years. Once I did my last big exit, I thought, well, I'm in my 40s. I better go and find a real job. Otherwise, no, I'm never going to get employed anymore. And I was thinking about what am I passionate about, right? I was thinking about, I've done everything. As a startup entrepreneur, you're like CEO stands for Chief Everything Officer, and by everything we mean everything that nobody else wants to do. Right? Mm-hmm. If you don't have money to pay someone to do something, you do it. that's
Yep, exactly. You learn.
you learn. So coming out of 20 years of doing everything that nobody else wants to do, you kind of think, okay, what is it that I enjoy doing? And what I realized I enjoy doing is I enjoy people contact. I enjoy sales. So I went into a corporate sales career. I spent about 4 years running sales and marketing for a company called Catalyst Cloud here in New Zealand, a very ambitious cloud provider taking on AWS and Microsoft in their own game with local data centers here in New Zealand. Then I did some work with a company called OneNet, and then somehow I fell into the other side of the fence from being sales to being chief digital officer for a food manufacturer, before realizing actually my heart's in the startup and entrepreneurial land, which is where I'm back at right now.
Yeah. So the skills you learned early on would have definitely helped you there, and then you would have learned probably something different at that level.
Yeah.
Because you're probably dealing in larger contracts, bigger things, longer buying cycle, and then how to map that back into when you made that pivot back, I'm guessing.
Yes and no. My last business that I've had, Vodacom, we've had some substantial organizations that we were servicing. So I was already familiar with the longer buying cycle and selling into that larger corporate. I wasn't doing it myself. I was doing it with the help of some very experienced salespeople. So learning how to do it myself, I guess, was very valuable for me. And not only learning how to do it myself, I was very fortunate to be coached by one of the best salespeople in New Zealand, who unfortunately is now retired from everything and isn't coaching anybody anymore. So I'm trying to pick that skill up myself. But I've filled in a lot of the gaps in my understanding of sales process and sales strategy for this B2B technology sales, from what I've had experienced over the last 20 years before that.
Okay. So we can probably do an episode on each one of your startups.
Absolutely.
Is my guess.
Yeah.
What,
Yeah.
How could you give us an overview of sort of the different spectrums or what you've done over the years in that journey? And then we can go into some key learnings after that. At least give us some background to start with.
Well, there's a lot of they all have their own story in their own right. You're absolutely right. Could do an episode on each, and they all had a very interesting journey. My very first foray into business, I always often ask people how much they spend for the education. It's an interesting question. I spent $20,000 investment that gone poof to get educated on how not to run a business. and they weren't even my mistakes, right? So so my very first foray into business was partnering up with another business that went spectacularly bust, taking in some of my cash. But it taught me what happens when it all goes to rubbish. And it showed me what to watch out for when you actually want to run a successful business. And so the next one that I've built was a lot more successful. I had some other lessons. The second most important lesson was choose your business partners carefully. Make sure that you are compatible with your business partners. It's a little bit like dating. The difference between dating and business is when you're dating, then you get married, then something happens and you divorce. You have to give half of everything that you built to someone else. In business, unfortunately, divorces sometimes take everything.
Yeah,
and then some,
depending on how you structure things.
And then some.
Yeah, it can be a big problem depending if you don't have the right structure
exactly.
in place.
I'm talking about exactly the worst case scenario. Yet people are much more careful about choosing their life partner than they are about choosing their business partner.
Well, yeah, you don't normally go and ask someone to get married on the first date, and that's generally what happens with a lot of our clients trying to pick people they want to work with, or businesses get excited about an opportunity and straight away let's partner and move forward. But there's not enough DD happening.
Yeah.
And not enough just taking time.
Absolutely, yeah, and that's exactly the problem. Quite often the problem. Sometimes people are lucky, but more often than not, it ends up in tears.
Yeah, it can. Yeah, I've heard some shocker stories. So, what sort of industry or area were you in? So, you've been in. Is it tech startups mostly?
So, I as a software developer by background, I've been. My entire life has been something to do with tech, something to do with software. My first successful business was New Zealand's first Linux specialist practice, and we were doing anything and everything as long as it's revolved around open source technology, from implementing websites and building web apps to people, to building file servers, email servers, firewalls. We've built one of the very first managed cybersecurity practice, building on top of Linux firewalls. So it was quite a wide-ranging business. And once I've sold that, I went into building my next successful startup, which was Vodacom, and that is IP telephony business. Again, software, but more with the telecommunications angle. And then I spent about 12 years in the unified communications, telecommunications, voice over IP space, when we started, it was quite new and quite revolutionary. By the time I sold the business, it was pretty much every man and his dog doing this thing kind of thing.
Yeah, there's a lot of white box solutions you can just resell.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So, what are some of the sort of the key things you've taken away over that journey of those startups and the ones you haven't mentioned that sort of carry on with you today into what you're doing?
Well, one of the main key things in business is build a business that solves a real problem. And I guess this isn't something that I have done, but I've seen many startups do it. They find the problem to create a solution, but the problem is not really a real problem. So a lot of startups end up with a solution that is beautifully built, and they've just spent a lot of time building it, and then they go out into the world in search of that problem that they've imagined in the first instance, and then it ends up not being a problem. And often, I have the sizing test, and that's kind of important because it's also part of my sales strategy that I'm preaching now, is that there is a size of the problem that the customer has, and then there is a size of the solution. And the way it all often looks is that you can solve this problem by spending $10, or you can get the solution that costs $100 to implement, and then implement that to solve the $10 problems. That's not going to work. No, customers are not
stupid. The scales are a bit unbalanced.
Yeah, just because it's shiny and automated doesn't mean that it costs less to implement and run. And one of the biggest challenges that a lot of entrepreneurs face is that they go into building something without realizing the true cost of implementing it, and what is going to be then cost to the customer to implement. They don't figure out the entire cost. Where my approach to business now is I start with engaging with the customer, engaging with target market, and understanding the size of the problem that they need solved. And then I work backwards to find whether there is a solution to be made. And it's very important to calculate not just the cost to me or the cost plus whatever profit that I want to make, but also the cost of change. That's one of the things that are very often misunderstood. And I've heard countless stories of salespeople complaining. They said, "Oh, it's a no-brainer. We went to them, they've got a budget of $100,000 and we've shown them this beautiful $80,000 solution. It's like a complete no-brainer. Just do it." And then if you dig deeper, you realize that, well, actually, for them, the cost of change may be another $50,000. So your $80,000 solution plus $50,000 is going to be way more than the problem that you're solving. And the problem and the challenge is customers don't articulate that very well, right? So they will not tell you. They just tell you, we've got a $100,000 budget. And then you work to that budget, right? You don't think about, when they say 100,000, they also mean some of the internal stuff. As a chief digital officer, I was a part of scoping out a transformation project for the company. And the executive team has been looking at what's the cost of the transformation projects. They've been looking at the quotes provided by the suppliers to implement that. And then what I ended up doing is I ended up going to the different department heads and saying, okay, well, if you're going to implement this, how much more staff do you need and for how long, right? And by the time I've calculated all that impact, because if you're a manufacturer, you can't stop manufacturing just because you're implementing a new system, right? People still gotta buy your stuff.
You have the transition
unless you shut down your whole manufacturing for a year, which nobody does, right? So you need
transition period which impacts
exactly. And then by the time we calculated that was double the cost of what our suppliers was costing it, were quoting us, and
Yep.
we've scrutinized it and pared it down to 80% of the cost, but still it's 1.8 times what we were quoted, which ended up to be quite a significant cost. And the challenge is that not many people actually do it. What they do is they look at your cost, they scratch their head, they think, well, actually, it's going to be a pain in the butt, so we're not going to do it. And by the pain in the butt, what they really mean is that by the time they add the cost of change, it's going to blow out their budget.
Yes, change management is always one of the most difficult things. Not just the cost of change, but actually trying to upskill, train, and get people who are stuck in their ways to actually adjust what they're doing.
Absolutely.
Is one of the biggest challenges you're going to have. People don't like change. Everyone likes to be doing what's familiar to them, and not have to change. I think that's a big problem in the tech startups, probably more than anywhere else, because you're building software or you've built something that you know will solve a problem.
Yeah.
But if you haven't factored in how that actually affects the user at the other end, then you're going to have a big problem, because you can't just say, all right, management's going to sign off on it and they're just going to push it through.
Yeah.
Because they're going to have problems. We had that, and that's how the whole reason of our DevReady brand started was we built a solution for a client. We thought we had asked all the right questions.
Mm-hmm.
He told us he had spoken to all the right people, built a great solution. He went to roll it out at a trade show, and then an internal business trade show.
Yep.
And no one else from the business wanted to take it on. So it sat there. So we thought, all right, how do we then get beyond that? Because we don't want to build things that, not let alone impact organizations. It's don't get used.
Yep.
And that's the worst thing you can do. And that's not you. You're factoring in the cost of the solution versus the problem, what your total addressable market is. It's understanding who you're going to affect, how's it going to benefit them, when are they going to get an ROI on that as well, is important, not just the cost.
Yeah, 100%. And I have the same experience of building something that doesn't get used. So, one of the things that we did early on in the Vodacom days is we've built this beautiful user interface, which I've designed, called Buddy, which was there was going to be the future of telephony. And a lot of people would buy the system just because of how well it looked and how user-friendly it appeared. Mm-hmm. Right? And then at some point I realized something was off. Like, I didn't know what, but I realized something was off. I was not the best UX designer in the world. So I've employed a UX designer. I actually ended up importing, because at the time nobody knew what UX even was a new concept. I ended up importing the guy from Chile.
Okay.
And he actually went on to do great things here. He was head of user experience for Xero for a while, eventually.
Oh, well.
And now I think he runs user experience at Atlassian. So quite a very talented guy. And we sort of sat down with him and started reviewing the user experience. And he goes, well, let's just see how many of our customers actually use Buddy. To my shock horror, I've discovered that the answer was almost none.
Oh, well. They just used the integrated solutions rather than that standalone version.
No, they didn't. They just picked up the phone and talked. Like, they did not use.
Oh,
okay. they did not use the user interface at all. There were a handful that did, and that gave us. But what that taught me is that, well, actually, contrary to what you just said, building something that sells but not necessarily is used is a kind of strategy, because it was
selling.
It was selling. Yeah, it was selling. But then don't kid yourself, right? You've got to know what the right thing to do. And when you have a big enough market and you've got something that sells but it's not getting used, it is kind of important to turn it into something that's getting used, because the problem is that then people don't end up renewing and keeping up. The retention's low, keeping up with the buying cycle. But the point is, just because you can sell it doesn't mean it's useful. Don't kid yourself.
Correct. Yeah, and I think the best example that comes to mind of that I can remember,
Yeah.
which is probably dating my knowledge a bit, and you'd remember this as well, was Microsoft Word moving from the traditional menus
Yeah.
to that new ribbon interface. Like, was it 10 years ago now? Word 2013, I think it was.
Yeah.
And the reason they did it was when they polled their users, how many of these functions do you know exist or how to use them, and no one knew any of them. And they were getting new feature requests, I think, every week for functionality that was already in the product, because people didn't know how to find it, didn't know how to surface it, because the existing menu was crap. So that's a scenario where you have the product sold, people are familiar with it, but then the big change management at their level, which is probably very unprecedented to get a change management process at that scope, where you've rolled out a new interface that billions of people may be using to try and solve problems that don't exist because the people don't know how to find things.
Yep, absolutely. I 100%, and I totally agree with you. And that kind of taught me also the importance of user experience and building something that people will eventually use. Sales is one thing, user experience is another.
Yeah, you need people to use the product. It's just like if you're a carpenter or someone else. If you're building a piece of furniture or a house and no one's going to use it, what's the point? You feel like, all right, you've got them paid for it, but it's like hollow. You haven't achieved anything.
Exactly.
You actually want to help people. I think that problem of building something without a solution, from my mind, a lot of probably tech founders do that more than the non-tech founders. I think the non-tech founders may not ask the right questions, but the tech founders, because they can code, can just jump into doing something very quickly. Oh, it's easy. I'll do it over a weekend, and they get a really quick prototype going, and now they've got now they're looking to
find a problem.
Find a problem that fits that solution that they've put together.
A solution looking for. Yes, and I agree with you, and that's one of the challenges with a lot of tech founders is build. They do tend to often build a solution in search of a problem, and then the next step, of course, they go and look for funding. And one of my favorite sort of don'ts in funding is 99% of funding pitches that I've seen look something like that. I've just quit my job, so I can do this really cool gadget that nobody wants to buy. So now I want you to pay my salary so I can keep working on it.
Yeah. Okay. Not a good pitch, is it?
Well, when you boil it down, 90% of startup pitches look something like that, right? Or I want to quit my job, right? I build this gadget nobody wants to buy, and very often so I've built 2 businesses organically, and the startups that I'm founding now, I'm also growing organically and very and what they call bootstrapping. And very often when people come to me for advice on seeking investment or raising capital, my first answer is, well, your best investors are your customers. Have you tried selling it? And when the answer is, well, no, then, okay, so you've built something nobody wants to buy and you want investors to buy it instead. What's in it for them, right? It's the brutal kind of response to it. There are a lot of nuanced things, like sometimes, but in order for me to cover my development costs, I need to scale and I need to sell so many. So there are nuances, but no matter how many sales that you need to make to have your business profitable, you can make those sales. There are, for consumer goods, there are things like Kickstarter, for example, where you can do a crowdfunding campaign and basically sell what you don't have to a lot of customers. If it's a solution that has a problem, you can find enough clients. You can get people to come in and commit to buying your product if it's built, and then find enough people that want to buy it. But most, my area of expertise is the B2B larger sales, And if you're doing a B2B solution for a medium-sized or larger-sized customers, typically you only need a handful of clients in order to build your business viable. So go and land one, go and land two, three, and then you've got enough cash coming in to cover 60, 70, 80% of what you need to spend. Then the pitch to investor is kind of different. You come to them and say, I've got this business opportunity. Come and be my business partner so you can make some extra money on your cash. That's how a pitch for investment should look like, as opposed to, I need salary to pay for myself and some of my developers.
You're investable at that point because you've got people who have committed to paying, which means there isn't a market, there is an appetite, we have growth.
Absolutely.
Where the other way is you're getting money either, like you said, cover my salary so I can afford to do this.
Yeah.
And then we'll see and look and potentially we'll find a market.
Yeah.
Rather than, all right, I have tested, here's the 20 different strategies I've tried, here's the 3 messages that work, here's the 6 customers that have agreed to pay. Like, it doesn't even have to be big numbers, as long as you can commit to get people to pay for something.
Of course, you need to prove your market.
And we're doing that ourselves. So we're AI boom now. We're building an AI assisted consulting product.
Yep.
But it started as it's solving my problem. So I'm building it for myself to make my job easier. And then eventually we're like, all right, there's other people like me. So then now, all right, this could be something that goes in the market. And we're just talking to people, getting feedback, and now trying to actually sell it, because while we've built a solution that's our problem, it is a common problem for everyone else, but it's our way of doing it.
Well, that's very similar to one of the companies I'm involved with, which is Blacklock.io. It's a cybersecurity product helping organizations with their penetration testing. And it kind of came from same roots. So Nilesh Kapoor, who is the founder and CEO of Blacklock, he was a pen tester himself. And initially, what he was doing is he was building an automation tool to automate all his admin stuff and all his menial things. And so eventually he automated all of the admin, all of the report writing, and brought the workflow to what he's doing, and suddenly ended up with a product that automates pen tester's job.
Yeah.
He brought me on board once he already got that product ready. So over the last couple of years, we've been scaling it up, and it ends up being a pleasure and an easy product to sell, because you're selling something that was built to solve a specific problem.
Yeah, if you can solve your own problem, then you're on the right path, rather than just building a cool idea and then trying to figure out what to do with it.
Exactly.
Because if you have a problem, there's going to be other people like you. You know the market, you understand the pain points, you know how to actually sell to it as well.
Yeah.
If that's where having that like domain experience related to the startup that you're actually taking on is really critical.
It's very important, very important. But don't just solve your own problem because you think it is a problem. Solve it if you've got revenue. So if you're solving your own problem to help you be more efficient, do that when you need to be more efficient because there's a bigger market for you to address, right? A good point. If you are a carpenter and you've got 3 clients for the things that you build, and you're doing it manually and it takes up half of your day, just because you automate it and now you can do the same thing in a couple of hours. Well, then what? If you don't have any more clients,
if it's going to help you scale,
it didn't actually help you scale. Yes. So, one of the challenges, there's a lot of conversations in New Zealand, for example, because let's face it, New Zealand is a very tiny market. Our whole entire country, our entire market is one suburb of Sydney. Sydney. No, not one suburb. Sydney. Auckland is like a suburb of Sydney, but the whole New Zealand is like Sydney, right? And that's the entire market, right? So if you have built enough capability to service this entire market, making yourself more efficient is not going to increase this market. You actually need to go and find ways to get other markets. And automation in the same market that you're in versus automation to scale up outside of your own jurisdiction, outside of your own geographical location, these automations could be actually very, very different. And that's another thing that people need to realize. And that's one of the challenges. Interesting, I see a lot of Australian companies coming into New Zealand failing because they automate for bigger market inside Australia, but they don't deal very well with a smaller market here. Even though we speak the same language and the market dynamics appear to be the same, but they're not because of the size. And same goes for New Zealand companies going into Australia. They need to accommodate for geographical distance, time zone differences, but also different ways of doing business. A bigger market means different way of doing business. And then both New Zealand and Australians, when we go to the US, that becomes, another level, another challenge.
Yeah, it's 50 Australias there.
Exactly.
Each state's like a different country.
Each state's like Australia, and that's how we feel coming from New Zealand to Australia as well. For us, it's 10 New Zealands or 5 New Zealand, five times the size of New Zealand, and each state is different market as well. So a lot of these things I've managed with both of my companies that were successful. We managed to establish ourselves in Australia, but never really managed to go any further than that. That was getting a bit difficult. And the advice we had is, for us to go beyond Australia, that's when you need investment. That's where you need to say, okay, well, now you've proven this market and this market. Now to take it to the next level, next market, you actually need to spend some money. And this is where you go to investors and say, well, we've proven the product, we've proven the market, but we need now investment to scale outside.
Yeah, and you've got revenues, and then they can actually see a path to an exit for them as well.
Yeah, of course.
Because you shouldn't be trying to get investment or sell at the peak, because there's nothing left for the next person.
Yeah.
You need to let them have room and a runway to be able to actually try and capitalize on their win, like their investment.
Yeah, absolutely. Except, this is where technology businesses are better than some of the bricks and mortar one, because with tech businesses, there's never really a peak. There's very seldom a peak, and we have this example of in New Zealand we have a company called TradeMe, which is our equivalent of eBay, and TradeMe has managed to sew up this market pretty well. So there is no eBay in New Zealand because there's TradeMe.
Okay.
And the guy who built TradeMe, he sold that company for about $700 million, and everyone thought this was a peak. And it's been sold twice or 3 times since then. Now it's valued in the billions, and it's still growing. So
is it because it just capitalized the market? It's not.
Well, it's
adding new features, adding new products. New ways
it's completely
of monetizing.
captured the market, and it's just adds. So they've added, there was just your general goods. They've added motors. They've added real estate. They've pretty much taken over the whole real estate market. The rental and sales.
They've gone into other verticals to grow.
Yeah, they've gone. And they keep adding. They now recently added jobs. Etc. Because it's such a big brand in New Zealand. Anything you need something, you go to TradeMe first just to see if anyone's selling that. Yeah. So and it keeps growing.
Okay. So it depends how you approach it. So the standard auction probably would have had a peak and a limit, and then they had to expand into the next vertical to be able to then grow the business and leave some more cash on the table for the next person to come in and milk. So there is quite a lot of things to look at, whether you're starting a business, building a product, or trying to figure out how to get it to the next level. There's hundreds of things you can look at, and you won't know if you're making the right decision either as you're going through those things. It's just trying to speak to yourself and learn from people like you or people who have gone through these journeys before to learn as many little things as possible. So then hopefully one of those nuggets is the right decision at that point in time. Absolutely. But building
Absolutely.
your defenses up with the information is critical.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, Igor, it's been a pleasure to chat to you today. We'll have to cut this short, being wary of the time.
Sure.
We probably can do another episode at some other point. I think we barely touched the surface of what you've been doing, but some key information came out of that. If anyone wants to get in touch and learn more about you, how can they do that?
So I have a website called igorportugal.com, or they can send me an email, igor.portugal@gmail.com, or even better, hit me up on LinkedIn. I usually accept invites from Australia and New Zealand. Hit me up on LinkedIn, and I'm happy to talk business. Always happy to share what I've learned with people.
And then check out Igor's got a series called 99 Coffees as well, where he interviews and people similar to this process and shares their story with them. We'll add all those links into the show notes as well. And once again, Igor, thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Sounds good. Thank you, Anthony. It's been a pleasure too.
Thank you.